you know, something took place in my spirit over the last few years, that I was not content to be silenced by a governmental alliance of a 501c3 that said I could not speak on political issues in the political realm. And I was not content in my heart that I would allow Caesar to have control of my voice. That I wanted to be free to speak for God and not have to be silent when the battle was raging that will affect the future of my 7 children. And because of that, we started the call to action. This is the first gathering of the call to action. We are a 501c4, and my goal is to not be hindered when I go to the calls and do other things. I want to speak clearly with a clear, unhindered voice of truth and justice in this nation. That's why we're gathering here today. It's the beginnings of the call to action. We are part of the dream of the call to action is to redefine voting in a generation, not as a political choice, but as a prophetic act of conscience to the nation. Voting is a sacred act. We vote on justice, the measuring line of justice, and the plumb line of truth. We want to do Psalms chapter 2 to train a generation that you don't vote Democrat or Republican, you vote moral absolute truths. And you also have to have the heart of justice. The sad thing is that primarily the Republican Party had stood for moral absolutes, and that's why we have voted for the ending of abortion, for moral and for marriage, the very defining issues of our day. But we also want to call the Republican Party to justice and compassion. Just shout that we want to be prophetic to a generation in those areas. We want to call a generation to understand that they are called in Psalms 2 out of the prayer meeting. Therefore you kings be warned, tremble you judges of the earth. We are called to speak to rulers to align with a higher government. We're starting a Be Warned campaign where we want to have young people with their phones, cell phones, and that when a bill is coming up and senators are going to vote on that bill that will actually remove those foundations of truth for life and for marriage. We want to call it Be Warned, and we put out a Be Warned statement. What would happen if 100,000 or 500,000 kids would have in their text messages, speed dial? They've got their senator, and they're on the phone with their senator saying, do not vote for this. This is not according to the truth of God's word. What if hundreds of thousands would jam the lines of their senators? What if we would raise up a generation who quickly go and say, be warned, you kings. I want us to think spiritual revolution, training a generation to seize technology and turn the tide because we're involved. I want a generation to be trained that they will never vote for anyone that's not pro-life. And that they would actually wear bands across the nation, and they would be praying, and we would raise up little kids wearing bands and praying for the ending of abortion with the realization when they get old enough to vote, they will never vote for anyone. And kids actually will go to their senators and say, I'm a 7-year-old, but I want you to know we're raising up an army that when we're old enough to vote, we will put you out if you vote against the foundational absolute truths of God's word.
It was judges, not